Zero trust is not a product like a friend of mine said once a few years ago. Okay, let's buy these 50 or 100 zero trust licenses and let's begin tomorrow implementing it. So it is not a product, it is in fact a philosophy, but or approach, rather approach it is. Let's say just few introductory words about it. So before, what we had, everything was inside the perimeter, and network security, that was all that we needed at that time, because we had a firewall and that was it. So users, devices, applications, everything was behind a DMZ and or firewall. So we had just one entry point to our data, into our environment. But today, actually, the internet started us to enable us to actually transform how we did things. The data slowly started to go outside the traditional data center, and then we have a lot of IoT devices, SaaS applications, partners, cloud services, shadow IT, different products. So we store sensitive data in transformative cloud services. So we have that stored almost everywhere, but at least in the on-premises. So if you think, you have to think about the trust and security of your data as the attacker. So if you were attacker and if the data was everywhere, would you what would you choose? Would you rather attack the almost, I wouldn't say impenetrable on-premises infrastructure, but there's a more effort to do so. Today, it's least effort, and the criminals, the bad people, actually use the least effort to get to your data, and that would be the social media identities today, especially for the ones that do not use multi-factor authentication and so on. So protecting just the infrastructure on premises, it's not what will bring the utmost security to your data. We have to think a little bit about other things as well. Few statistics: 95% of organizations roughly use the cloud. We use mobile applications. We use, of course, internet-connected devices. That's out of the question. So we can't imagine our work without the internet, and the data is outside. So you have to remember, again, I cannot express this enough. People that want to get your data will use the least effort to use the data. So think like a criminal if you want to protect your data. Anyway, the old world versus new world. We previously had users, employees that were users, the corporate managed devices, on-premises apps, and so on, monolithic applications, etc. Today we have the solutions that are tailored more to other things. Well, because the new world shifted, employees, partners, customer, bots, all of these are users and accessing our data. So the security landscape shifted and it's a little bit bigger. So because we have to protect our employees, partners, customers, and bots. Well, partners and protects themselves, of course, but we have to ensure the secure access to the partners if we give them our data and secure how the data is treated. Then we had corporate managed devices. Today we don't have. We now have bring your own devices, IoT, which is IoT are liability of today. So, and is going to be a liability even better. Oh, actually better, worse, and bigger tomorrow. There are no longer just on-premises apps, but we have explosion of cloud apps, and not just these, the cloud apps that we control and that we use, that we approve, but the others that we don't approve and that users use on their spare time. That's even catastrophic. Monolithic apps. We have now microservices, we have composite apps, public RESTful APIs, everything. Although there is a trend recently in a couple of months, this year, from microservices to monolithic services. Well, but we'll see how will this evolve. Then corporate network and firewall is not just one thing. We have expanding perimeters. Well, actually, our perimeters are expanded already, and there is the data is spread everywhere. We don't actually, well, we do need local packet tracking and logs, but we just actually need the logging all over the places. And fortunately, we have Azure, we have Microsoft 365, we have our logs everywhere in there. The point is, we just need to leverage these logs to catch the bad people that are trying to get our data. Three things are around the zero trust, but let's just say a few words about the zero trust itself. So zero verify explicitly, which means that we should always authenticate and authorize access to resources based on all available data points. So the ones that include user and device identity and behavior, device health, service or workloads, location, data classification, possible anomalies, everything. Then the second thing is using least privileged access, and that would be limiting user access and the amount of information and length of time people can access something with just in time or/and just enough access, and risk-based adaptive policies, for example, conditional access policies, definitely data protection policies, and so on. And the third very important part is also the always assume breach, and that means that we have to minimize or prevent lateral movement by segmenting access by network, device, subnet, user, application recognition, using end-to-end encryption, as well as using advanced analytics to detect any possible threats, not just the one that we know of and the one that are emerging, well, like zero-day threats, improve defenses, get comprehensive defense visibility, and so on. The Microsoft Zero Trust, well, actually, Zero Trust is not the Microsoft thing. What is Zero Trust anyway? So the Zero Trust is not a product. You don't buy a license for Zero Trust. You don't install Zero Trust IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS product. So Zero Trust, in fact, is a security model. It is a journey. It is a philosophy. That is a strategic approach to security, or even better, to cybersecurity. Zero Trust is often referred to as Zero Trust security model, or Zero Trust architecture, ZTA, or Zero Trust network access, ZTNA, something like that. And Zero Trust concept has gained popularity and visibility after the tectonic shift brought by mobile workforce and cloud computing, and they redefine, in fact, the security perimeter and cybersecurity approach from the ground. But the term itself is not as young as the cloud computing is. So it was mentioned and established for the first time in April 1994, when Stephen Paul Marsh, who was part of as a part of his doctoral studies at the University of Stirling, wrote the thesis formalizing trust as a computational concept. So in the following years, the term zero trust was brought up increasingly frequent at the beginning of the new 21st century, when finally gained traction, something 18 years later, when National Institute of Standards and Technology, this is a NIST and National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, published Zero Trust Architecture paper afterwards. And in fact, the quote from there is that the conventional network security has focused on perimeter defenses, but many organizations no longer have clearly defined perimeter. And to protect that modern enterprise, digital one, organizations need a comprehensive strategy for securing anytime and anywhere. So today we have the principle of zero trust across the digital estate. Microsoft has its own implementation because it has its own products. It, of course, logically, it will use its own products to establish zero trust strategy around identity, devices, apps, infrastructure, networking, and everything. Because if you just omit one of these and don't focus on just one of these endpoints or components, then you are severely deteriorating security. So that identities, whether they represent people, services, or IoTs devices, they define the zero trust control plane. And when an identity attempts actually to access a resource, then we need to verify that identity with strong authentication. And we need to ensure that access is compliant and typical for that identity. So, and follows least privilege access principle. That's why we need to follow the signals. Fortunately, we do. Actually, Microsoft does it for us, the Azure Microsoft 365, so we don't have to. We just need to analyze it. Fortunately, we also have tools like Microsoft Defender Suite or Family, Advanced Threat Protection, Log Analytics, Sentinel, and everything. But we need to. We are the ones who turn on the logs, stream the logs, analyze the logs, collect the logs, have the people who care about that security, who watch out. Secure architecture is there, of course. It is not just turning on and buying licenses for every product. It's just it is not just that well simple. The zero trust is more than that. So it is the product, it is the implementation, it is the secure strategy, but it's also philosophy and thinking up front what is going to be, what could be improved, and where the bad people are, what they can do in order to get to our data, and we are here to prevent that. And speaking of devices, so once a device has been granted access to a resource, data can flow to a variety of different devices, from IoT to smartphones, bring your own device, partner managed devices, and so on, cloud hosted servers, etc. And that diversity actually creates a extremely large attack surface area, and that requires monitoring, enforcing device health, compliance for secure access. Then we have applications, APIs. These are the interfaces by which the data is consumed. They might be legacy on-premises, lifted and shifted to cloud workloads, modern SaaS applications. It doesn't matter. We control and we have the controls and technologies that we should apply to discover any possible shadow IT, ensure appropriate in-app permissions, gate access based on real-time analytics, and so on, monitor abnormal behavior, etc. Then we have the data. These are all the links in our chain. Ultimately, the data itself is what we are protecting at, and the data security teams are focused on protecting data. So where possible, data should remain safe, even if it leaves the devices, apps, infrastructure, and networks, and organization controls. And that data should be classified, labeled, and encrypted, and access restricted. Why? Because not all the data has same sensitivity, and if we apply the same level of protection to all the data, it will be bad. If we apply a lower level of protection, then some higher sensitive data will leak eventually, or the eyes that shouldn't look at that data will get access to the data. Or if we protect very strongly all the data, then it will take a long time to protect that. It will be very difficult for users to work with, and so on. So we are practically shooting ourselves in the foot in this case. And you have to remember that, and this is what I've seen a lot of through even with the larger companies with hundreds of thousands of employees. The cloud is shared responsibility. So Microsoft has a responsibility to encrypt the data at rest and in motion, but it's our responsibility to implement all the security tools and products and services and features and everything. So it is a shared responsibility. It's our responsibility to protect the data when it's not longer in the Microsoft cloud, and that means when it leaves the cloud. So that is the, for example, rights management services, actually Microsoft information protection, and so on. So it is the same thing as if we buy the anti-theft, these high security doors that we put in our houses, but actually don't close the door or lock the door, or even worse, that we don't protect the key efficiently. So if we leave that key out in the car, someone will actually just need the big rock, break the glass of the doors of the car, and take the key and actually go inside. That's the same thing that we need to apply in Azure. So we have to protect our keys access, or key vault, or certificates, or whatever it is. So the weakest link is here what makes the security most vulnerable. And then again, there's the infrastructure, whether it's on-premises servers, cloud-based VMs, and containers, microservices, whatever they are. These represent critical vector, critical threat vector, and we need to assess for version configuration, just-in-time access to harden defense and use telemetry to detect attacks. Of course, no one can have everything. It would be very good that everyone had a chance to and possibility to buy all the licenses that we have. But unfortunately, that will be very inconvenient to administer. We need to have money, of course, and we need to have personnel to manage all of these. But at least if even if we are the smaller companies and like team of 5 or company of 5, then there's always data protection, and there's always the email protection, for example, Defender for Office 365, and the best practices. So we have to do whatever it is possible in our capability to protect the data as much as possible, and to implement these zero trust solutions and philosophy. And the holistic approach to zero trust should be extended throughout the entire digital estate. So it serves, in fact, the integrated security philosophy, end-to-end strategy. So verifying identities, verifying devices, protecting the data, hardening applications, protecting infrastructure, governing networks, and so on. And then to tie everything together, then we have policy-driven access, which is for example, conditional access policies. And these modern microsegmentation means more networks, and more than networks, in fact. It requires that we also gate access based on the role, location, behavior pattern, data sensitivity, client application, device security, and so on. So ensuring all the policies automatically enforced at the time of access and continuously throughout the session where possible. Previously, we didn't have that. We just had, okay, whether the user is legitimate or not, which means did the user supply the correct password, and then it was granted access to the network, and the user could do everything in there. So even if I stole someone's password, the system wouldn't know, or anyone wouldn't know that I gained unauthorized access, and this probably wouldn't even be noticed until I actually have stolen the data, and after a couple of months, typically roughly and on average in 6 to 8 month time is the time when the companies actually figure out that they have been breached. In fact, there are two types of companies: the one that have been breached, and the ones that do not know that have been that have been already breached. Figuratively, it means there is always there is no complete secure system, but we need to take in our responsibility to protect everything in all the places. So why conditional access? Because, for example, I might in the previous case when I stole someone's password, in conditional access in zero trust implementation, in zero trust environment, in the environment that has implemented zero trust products and solutions, we would have conditional access, and all the signals would have been examined, and then the system will have the baseline of the behavior of that user, and it will signal someone that I'm doing something that is out of the ordinary. For example, if I, as a user, usually access 1 gigabyte of data per day, then if I do something out of that ordinary things, like if I access 2 gigabytes, or if I access the data after work hours, then this is the red flag, and someone will get alerted or noticed, or the system will take precautionary measures. We have automation, for example, block access to that user if that kind of behavior is detected. And this is the real enforcement of the zero trust, for example, using the conditional access. That's how today attackers work. And if we don't have such complex tools, we can't protect ourselves from the attackers at all, because the attacks will be more frequent tomorrow and the day after tomorrow as well. So the attacks are increasingly well, attacks increases as well as the attempts and the data theft. So let's go over each of these identities, devices, and pillars, data apps, and see what Microsoft has. And then we have also at the end a few Azure and Microsoft 365 examples of zero trust implementation. But instead of in zero trust model, identities, whether they represent people, services, or IoT devices, define the control plane in which access decisions are made. And the lowest hanging fruit today for thieves is identity, because we use our identities everywhere, and these identities are easily spoofed or manipulated. Because, for example, you use your Office 360 email around all the places, eventually on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram, wherever, and you use your email to register everywhere. So there are free and very extremely powerful paid tools, security tools, hacker tools that can that can be used to obtain your password or to social engineer people. And once once the attackers have your username and password, then it's easy to for them to access your email or some cloud resource that you might be using, because people are tend to reuse the password, for example. That's one scenario. So we have to protect these identities with strong authentication. The multi-factor authentication seems very obvious, and everyone talks about multi-factor authentication, and it seems like this is the mandatory thing, and very simple. That in that way, it seems oversimplified, that people neglect them and companies neglect them, and they even turn off the multi-factor authentication. So it is becoming kind of a reverse psychology. So I've seen a lot of bigger companies that turn off the multi-factor authentication. In fact, MFA will resolve you and relieve of you 99% of the identity-based attacks. So the multi-factor authentication is a must. You have to have at least one form, at least one second form of authentication, whether it's very good free Microsoft Authenticator or Ubiquitous Authenticator or Google, whatever it is. They're free to use. And now we have a lot of different options to use in Microsoft Azure, Microsoft 365 for second factor authentication. Connecting all of users, so we can extend the benefits of single sign-on to users. Then verified entities with strong authentication. This is the implementing the MFA. So this is the single most important change that you can take. 99, well, some researchers say 95, some say 90, some say 99.9. Whatever they are, definitely multi-factor authentication is not just the protecting factor, but it's also the deterring factor. Because if you have an attacker that considers attacking two identities and scans online resources for two identities and find two identities, one that has multi-factor authentication enabled and one that doesn't have, the attacker job is much easier with one that doesn't have multi-factor authentication. First, it's deterred, and it will try to break break the one that doesn't have MFA enabled. The same thing as if you were a thief and were considering to rob the house or bank, the one that doesn't have cameras or dogs or fences or armed guards, and the one that has. So if I were a thief, I will first go to the one that doesn't have all the protection features and leave that one untouched. Is it possible to break into that bank that has dogs, cameras, and armed guards? Yes, of course, but you have to have more knowledge, you have to have more time, you have to have more money to go inside, because you have to have more tools and knowledge how to circumvent all the protection. That's the absolutely the same in Azure. So if you implement layered security, if you implement the multi-factor authentication, if you implement zero trust products and architecture, then the attackers have much harder job to get to your data. So is it possible to do so? Yes, it is possible, but the point is we need to ruin the return on investment for the attackers and to extend the time for them to get to your data. And that is first ruining again their return on investment, because the time is money. And the second, they will leave more traces and they will need more time. Therefore, you will get you will you will notice faster that someone is trying to do so, and then you'll be able to prevent the attacks if you do so. So the enforcing controlling access with smart risk assessments, for example, like conditional access policies, and enforcing least privilege access. That is also very, very important to do so, because not having the least privilege access means we are deliberately ruining the security. So give the people only these permissions that they actually need to perform their work and their job. And in current reality of highly dispersed remote workforce, now here in fact more than ever, identity is the control plane, and it's in fact the weakest link is the control plane, is the identity attack plane of the thieves today. The first step towards starting the zero trust journey is consolidating identities across on-premises cloud applications, and it is the single source truth of managing and securing access. So MFA first, connect Azure AD. If you have on-premises AD4s, connect that utilizing a hybrid environment, and then provide SSO. And again, MFA definitely. By connecting the sign-in experience for all of your apps, on-premises, clouds, and third-party apps, and then from any device and managing the users directories together, you gain better control and visibility. And in fact, you also provide a simplified and better experience for the users, as well as reducing the risk of course of getting to someone. Again, multi-factor authentication. So Microsoft supports a broad range of MFA options. Microsoft Authenticator, which is the free tool. Then there's the Windows Hello. In fact, it is free. It is great built-in experience on the PC. Microsoft uses Windows Hello for Business. It is face, fingerprint, or PIN. That data stays on the machine. So even if someone knows your PIN, it won't be able to break into your Microsoft 365 account unless it has the physical access to that laptop that you are using. So even if someone is shoulder surfing and uses your and sees your PIN, then your entire tenant is secure, because that PIN is only tied to that device that you use. You can easily change that afterwards, and then you're secure. FIDO2 security keys. Here we have Yubico here in Stockholm. So FIDO2 security here, keys are now available from several partners like Yubico, Feature, and EWBM, and so on, Gemalto, etc. We already have, there are the hundreds and hundreds of millions of passwordless users authentications, and that number is getting bigger. So it prevents 99.9 or whatever it is. It's preventable if you use the multi-factor authentication. Very simple to use and very effective, biggest bang for the buck. And there is also a nice email campaign for that multi-factor authentication. So if you have a user friction, then download the MFA campaign and just use these resources, because they're very, very useful. So if I would emphasize on something and extract one thing that you could do right now for the biggest bank for the market would be the multi-factor authentication. Of course, there is always good to communicate with people, to explain them why, to describe them how to use. And the second factor, which is also very important, it's not necessarily the factor of zero trust security, but is the training and the user awareness. That's also very simple and very effective, and also neglected part of the security. Because if you have a user that is not educated enough, that doesn't know the threats, if it clicks on a resource, and if the single click can compromise all the company. So the education as well. Control access with smart policies and risk assessments. So device conditional access. The conditional access is critical. It takes over of almost 250 terabytes of identity-related security goals, and that include behavior, location, state of device, application being accessed, risk score, and so on. So use these and make granular policies. So these capabilities extend to everything. So you can use conditional access policies to define conditions under which users can access cloud resources. So which within Azure, you can also get access to MFA, customer logbox, RBACs, and so on. So this is also, I would say, a must to do so. And of course, on average, it takes an average of around 60 days to find and contain malicious access. That was different researchers point on different things, but usually what the attackers do, they get access and stay still and sit and observe, and they can stand still and observe for 8 to 10 months. That's why it's hard to figure out whether you are breached or not, because after observing for a couple of months, then the attackers make a move, and they usually make a move, one move at a time, and observe what is going on. So as we involve in security and as we do zero trust as well, we need to ramp up and also implement other things as well, or like Sentinel if we hadn't, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, even in free mode, for example. So anyway, the main principle of zero trust is to assume breach. That means that we must question everything. What does it mean? It means that we have to use the tools that do that, of course, valuing identity context using the authentication and authorization process, and that ensures that a user, in fact, is who they say they are. So using a device we recognize and accessing the network from an authorized location. For example, if there is no need for users to access our resources from outside Sweden, then we can set up the locations and limit these users. The MFA where people make mistakes is that administrators they overburden users with prompts, and do not do that. If you have tens of prompts per day, or some of or weekly or hundreds, then the users wouldn't know what is the legitimate request and what is the illegitimate request. Either two things will happen: they will reject everything, or eventually they will, out of hundreds of these requests, they will allow one request, illegitimate request, to go through, and then the game is over. So make the MFA like you don't have it. So don't prompt every day. Make the prompts, for example, weekly or bi-weekly for the known locations, and then use conditional access policies to prompt users if something changes. For example, if the user leaves the country or town or place or IP address range. So make this the priority. And of course, for admins, for sensitive, that we have also the additional access rights that we can provide users with the ability to do self-service. That is also a very important one. For the admins, for sensitive resources, we can use privileged identity management for just-in-time and just enough access. And also life cycle of these resources is also very important, because these life cycle is just one thing. The life cycle is in fact can identify any potentially orphaned and toxic or exposed or unauthorized access of the users at the end of the life cycle. A lot of companies have leftovers in the cloud, so virtual machines, networks, keys, certificates, secrets, storage accounts, email accounts, and everything. So obsolete things that no one used, people left company, and these are left behind. So think about these. Life cycle is also very important. Devices also is a zero trust objective. Allow only compliant and trusted apps and devices to access data. So we need to invest in visibility and device health and compliance. So it is important. Devices can easily become the weakest link. So everyone has devices. We work on computers. We work on laptops. We have at least each of one, at least one mobile phone, and that is the device. So there is you might not everyone might not have a mega, for example, account or a Dropbox account, but everyone has at least some kind of device to access the files. So it is important to protect devices as well. Conditional access again is a great way to deliver the security layers without compromising end user experience. So devices can easily become also the weakest link unless the security policies are enforced. There are several ways to secure the endpoint, of course, but for example, enrolling device for the management. Enrollment, in fact, is not required in every case, depending on what kind of business you have. You might be able to maintain the right security using managed applications, for example. Restrict access from vulnerable, compromised devices using conditional access, and restrict what kind of applications can be used. So security is not one big switch, but it's in fact all the granular things that we can do and set up and configure to increase the security. So the Japanese have a very good saying. In translated is every single small improvement increases the improvement overall over the time. So we are making little steps, securing here and there in every aspect to get a bigger security gain overall. So again, we are making it harder for the attackers to attack or compromise our environment, and gaining visibility into the endpoints, accessing the corporate resources is also the first should be the first step in zero trust device strategy. And companies are usually better in protecting PCs while mobile devices often go unmonitored, and that is because of the users, and users say usually oh, this is my device, I don't want the company to access my device, and so on. But I think that there should be a compromise, and the IT admins, the security admins, and the company and the users should be aware that there has to be some compromise there. So either use corporate devices, or either raise awareness, or allow the personal devices to be at least not enrolled in the AD, but maybe joined or something. Or use the information protection. Again, it is the also very important part that you focus on mobile devices, mobile devices too, and on shadow IT as well. So you have to limit or control how the files are disseminated, and protect them whilst they are on in the wild or outside the protected environment. Once we know, for example, about the information about the device health and compliance status, then we can use the conditional access, for example, to enforce granular risk-based policies. So, for example, we can ensure that no devices with malware detected are allowed until access is remediated, or, for example, the ones that are missing the security patches. Recently for iOS, we had one out of the one very urgent security patch, for example, and so on. So that will be the case scenario where we will require these users to update their devices and to be secure. And that would be there are two approaches to endpoint security management. Then we have the managing all aspects of the device using what is known as MDM, or manage only selected applications running on the device using an approach often called MAM, for example. So either way, the better. It's better than nothing. So the personal data stays personal, the managed data stays managed. So no, in the latter example, no users should fear that the company is sneaking upon the personal data, of course. Or you can, of course, have the corporate devices and have a complete and conditional access to that data, of course. Again, the bottom line is that you have to explicitly verify enable access to trust and compliant apps on managed or unmanaged devices for zero trust security. Again, the objective of zero trust for applications is to ensure that applications are available, visible, and secured. That means we need to discover all apps. If we don't know what the users are using, then we might be leaking some data somewhere. Users might be using some applications that are that have known vulnerabilities, that are very vulnerable, like that have holes like Swiss cheese, and that is also the something that and companies do not know. It is needed just one of such application that has a security vulnerability, and then again it is game over. For us, protecting the environment, we have a much harder job to do than the attackers, because we have to be right all the time, and the attackers need to be right just one time out of the millions and billions of attempts to get into our data. So we have to be right every time. But if the bad people are right just once out of the million, then again it's game over, because we have breached. So discovering the applications and enforcing the applications, which one to use, applying adaptive access controls, for example, and protecting the data. Real-time protection is needed to protect against cyber threats and anomalies, for example. We can't apply access policies to apps we don't know that are being used. So discovering the cloud apps and services being used and assessing them for a risk, and then deciding whether to approve and apply policy or block. It is the one part of applying the zero trust principle. Again, that is also the policy enforcement that we can extend into the session, for example, using conditional access. Again, it's a very versatile tool, conditional access. So limiting access to read-only, block sensitive data, preventing uploading of unlabeled files, applying labels protections to document being downloaded, uploaded, monitoring risk user sessions, and so on. Again, we do have cloud apps, then Defender for Cloud Apps, for example. Here, all the applications and work in synergy, so these are intertwined. So understanding the sensitive data landscape and file activity, it's important, including visibility into potentially risky file sharing activity. Again, we have conditional access tied to the condition Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, automatically classifying, labeling, and applying protection to files based on the sensitivity of the information contained in a file. It's also the very important thing. Also applying the DLP policies, such blocking the upload, downloading a file. But it's not just that. DLP policies also work on in between applications. For example, if we use Defender for Cloud Apps, and if the users share sensitive data between Google Suite and Facebook Workplace, then we can prevent sharing the data even in the chat, for example, or sharing the data in files. So that doesn't apply just to the Microsoft things, Microsoft products, but also to the third-party ones. So sharing the data in Teams, between Teams and Google Suite and Facebook Workspace, it's also possible. That is just one drop in the sea of things that we can do, for example, to protect our data. And fortunately, Microsoft, with the Defender for Cloud Apps, protects a lot of through a lot of third-party apps and recognizes more than 35,000 applications, cloud applications. So there is a lot of potential there. Again, and finally, we have Zero Trust objective for the infrastructure. It is the hardening defenses and detecting and responding to threats in real time. So what do we have? We have for many organizations, the critical applications and services are still running on corporate on-premises managed infrastructure, but the Zero Trust strategy also involves protecting these as well. It is not just about cloud, because a lot of companies are in a hybrid cloud. So extending and segmenting strategy and role-based access controls to the infrastructure is critical. Defender for Cloud, for example, now has the well, not now, just a few years now. It has the capability to protect resources that have been enrolled by Azure Arc, the on-premises ones, the resources from Amazon Web Services, from Google Cloud Platform, from different clouds. Not just these, but from GitHub as well. It protects the Azure DevOps solutions, etc. So all these infrastructure is the critical one that needs to be protected. So extending and segmenting the strategy and role-based access control to the infrastructure is critical. Real-time threat monitoring to detect attacks and anomalies means using Defender for Cloud, for example, and Azure Sentinel, actually Microsoft Sentinel, to detect the anomalous behavior is also very important. As well as these tools enable us to automate responses, so we don't have to look at the screen 24/7, but we can automate critical things as they happen. And fortunately, now we have, for example, like Defender for Cloud, which is the single pane of glass in, I would say, roughly in 80% of the infrastructure that we have security posture. And that number is increasing, and coverage is increasing. Now, Defender for Cloud covers not just storage and compute, but also Kubernetes and SQL and different clouds and DNS and everything. So a lot of things. A good enterprise segmentation strategy enables operations, minimizes operation friction by aligning to business practices, by isolating sensitive workloads, for example, and isolating high exposure systems. That means segmentation is a very important part here. And without monitoring, there wouldn't be the correctly secured environment. Again, we have Microsoft Defender for Cloud now that has cloud security posture management capabilities, that has a detection capabilities, just-in-time capabilities for compute here. And then we have I would say, a bird's eye or single pane of glass security posture view for all the things in Azure, on-premises, AWS, GCP, GitHub, then Azure DevOps, and so on. And there is yet to come again. Plus, if we have paid tier as well, there is the regulatory compliance that we need to take care of, and very important if we are audited and so on. So these supports also the custom policies, hardening, automatic remediations, and so on. Again, real-time threat monitoring is extended to all these apps, computes, containers, IoT devices, and others like SQL servers, etc., etc. Again, then there is the last part, which is the network, as is the part of the infrastructure, right? But the network one, it is the moving beyond traditional network security approaches. So the network continues to be a key point of control of and operational concern. So the zero trust approach here would be segmenting networks, context-driven access controls, isolation, then real-time threat protection, which means Defender for Cloud, for example, and encrypting the data. There is you're just one click away, you're 2 clicks away for implementing, for example, SQL encryption, or hiding the data, implementing the masking in SQL, or securing storage, or for example, enabling or disabling some unused access. Multi-level segmentation in Azure networking is what it is important, and for example, subscription or resource level access control, like RBAC controls, provide identity isolation. VNet provides a security boundary and subnetting that from other VNets unless connectivity is explicitly configured is another thing. Then again, network security groups or application security groups. There's the third thing which we can employ correctly to control network traffic security. Then Azure Firewall, again, it is a stateful firewall. That is also very nice. Now we have policies. We have 3 tiers of that firewall. Application gateway, or WAF, for example, web application firewall, is also one that we can implement, and so on. But then I would say first steps: correct segmentation, and correct RBAC controls, just enough administration, and of course just in time with Defender for Cloud. And then we have that Azure DDoS, which is of course just the optional one. We always had DDoS here, but now from the beginning of Azure, like 10, 11, 12 years ago, but now we have DDoS standard. Now that we have it, we are aware of, most of the people are aware of the Azure DDoS basic that has been always here. If we need, if you're probably a larger corporation or environment, then if you need a little bit more telemetry and protection, then you have also that DDoS solution. Again, web application firewall, I'll mention also that, as well as the which is the layer 7 firewall that protects from malicious attacks and known vulnerabilities like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, OWASP attacks, and so on. Again, that's not something that we have to deal with, but encryption is built into Azure at rest, in transit, in use. But we have additional options, for example, to encrypt additionally. For example, there is an option to encrypt the disks with R keys, even the third time, on top of the 2 possible encryption. For example, disk encryption enables and prevents prying eyes from extracting the disk and downloading the disk and using them elsewhere. Encrypting the for example, the data when it goes outside, it is possible. Again, maybe overkill, but we have VPN again to use to protect and encrypt the data additionally, even inside our Azure. So using the TLS, the recent one. Then again, very last part of it. I had 3 last parts. I've said networking was the last, and then the infrastructure, but now the data, it is truly the last part before we just take a look at our graphics and sample ones. So what about the data? As I mentioned previously, you have to know what kind of data you have. Not all the data is sensitive in the same way. The data doesn't have the same sensitivity. So identifying sensitive data is the first step towards zero trust on the data plane. You need to discover data across the digital estate. If you don't know what data you have, you can't ensure you're protecting the data correctly. So you need to start classifying data by sensitivity, and that goes very granularly and a little bit slower, but small steps toward protecting the data would be, for example, do not have more than 10 labels. 5 to 10 labels are the sweet spot. Everything above it, everything above 10, it's overkill for the specific department. For example, start implementing the most obvious label, the one that is, I would say, for example, top secret or whatever is highly confidential, because you are 99% sure what high confidential data in your company is. And then you can move granular towards the less confidential data. So maybe one on the top of the head would be the payrolls or some sensitive PII, or some, I don't know, maybe some research data and so on. So that would be where you should apply the protection. And again, with that classification also comes possibility to apply labels, DLP policies, and everything. It is not just the sensitivity and labeling for itself, but actually to protect the data correctly from being leaked. And classifying that data, it's of utmost importance. Again, there are some few examples of implementing the zero trust in Azure. And since we said that zero trust is not a product, is not the a product, it is an approach, it is a strategy. The point is, this is just a one very broad example of how one zero trust implementation of IaaS components is looking like. This is no way the way that it should like, but it shows the reference architecture with four key IaaS components: storage, VMs, spoke, and hub VNets, and how everything that we have in our environment has been applied, for example, to secure the data, like segmenting the security hub, workloads, spoke VNets, Azure storage services, common path services, on-premises data centers, office locations, and internet. So everything is segmented. Even between that, there are multiple segments. Like if you look at the number 2, then you have a front end and tier subnet, then you have the app tier, then you have the data tier. So additional segmentation, that's the correct implementation of the zero trust. Then you have the common path services that have additional segmentation capabilities and conditional access control, as well as you are protecting the storage services by implementing the correct keys to access these, whether these are policies or SAS keys, whatever they are. Again, then secure access to your network using, for example, Bastion subnet, even using the firewall or the secure way to connect is the gateway. I had one bad example where a company deliberately chose not to use VPN gateway but exposed SQL Server to the internet. Yes, you heard that. Good. They exposed the SQL Server and they were breached in 2 weeks. So the logical architectural tenants, management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups is also important. So nesting, and then just in time, actually just enough administration also applied that to the different segmentation, different groups as well. Different subscription, this is just one example. Again, we have threat protection with Microsoft 365. Well, it's not Microsoft 356, but actually Microsoft 365, it says wrong. Then we have different Defender products and Defender for Cloud that is enabled for different groups. We don't have to protect everything, but just from once, but gradually. So and granularly. So it important is that we protect these resources. And we have 2 more things to show before we wrap it up. Microsoft 365 Zero Trust deployment stack. This is one example. So for example, from bottom to top, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then again, we have another slide which shows the top of the stack. So configuring the identity would be the first, like we mentioned in the beginning. Then multi-factor authentication would be the second. Again, enrolling devices, configuring policies. Again, configuring these healthy and compliance devices. Also, it's something that we should build on top of that. This is the Zero Trust Foundation. Again, we move up, then we defend against threats and protecting data. So defending against threat means deploying maybe some Intune policies, for example, and employing any of these defenders. If we don't have all of these, no worries, at least one or two. Maybe you will skip a step, but again, the point is that you have a bigger picture of how this is being used and what it means. And then again, then labeling DLP policies. Not every company will have all of these products, but at least some should be applied. And to wrap it up and to thank you all, there is a very nice resource. aka.ms/zero trust is a Microsoft resource that you can use